Why should an online voting system be verifiable? Well, think about it this way. If you can't check that your vote arrived in the ballot box safely, how do you know what really happened to it? If your system doesn't record all activities taking place within it, how will you detect tampering? If you placed all of your trust in one person or organization, what happens if something goes wrong? You could take a chance and use a voting system which can't prove the accuracy of an election's results. But our question is, why risk your integrity? Democracy isn't something to toy with. Choose a fully verifiable online voting system.
Welcome, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Why Election Integrity Matters, Upholding Trust When Voting Online. When most people think of election, they think compliance. But at its core, this is about trust. Whether you're a professional association, a union, a corporate board, or a member-based group, elections are key moments for transparency and legitimacy. Yet in moving online, many organizations unknowingly use systems that lack the transparency needed to maintain that trust. And if results can't be verified, how can voters or leadership be confident in the outcome? Unfortunately, Jakob is unwell today and unable to join us, but we're very pleased to have Victor Hidalgo, Global Solution Manager at Lumi Global, stepping in to share his experience and guide us through the discussion. Victor, thank you for stepping in. Please go ahead, introduce yourself, and let us know how you got involved in digital election.
Thank you, Sylvie. And let me extend a warm welcome to everyone who took the time out of their busy schedules to join this webinar today. Yes, my name is Victor Hidalgo, and I am the Global Solutions Manager at Lumi, taking care of the election solutions we have, especially with online voting. So I started becoming engaged with online voting back in 2013. It's been 12 years now. So I have a background in telecommunications engineering, but I was always curious about democracy and how to enhance direct democracy through the internet. So yeah, I became engaged with this online voting thing, and I think it's very promising for the future.
It's promising, and I think it's a timely time. It's a timely moment as well. So thank you again, Victor, for joining us.
My pleasure.
So before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, the session is recorded and will be available, shared via email, so keep an eye on your inbox. Please participate through by submitting your questions or comments via the messaging tab of the platform. And then finally, we will conclude today's webinar with a survey. And so we're very interested in your feedback. Please tell us what you think and what you'd like to see from us in the future. So let's begin by setting the foundation for our discussion today. Online voting offers huge advantages, but it also comes with real risk. Without a system you can trust, the very legitimacy of your elections come into questions. So to start us off, let's look at what's truly at stake when you choose a voting system and why verification is so critical. So Victor, let's start with the big picture. What's really at stake when organizations choose an online voting system?
Well, I could answer that question with a single word, which is the word trust. which is a big word, and of course it's the fundamental success criteria of any election. You need to make sure that all voters, candidates, and stakeholders trust not only the election, but the organization that is conducting the election, the democratic methodology used, democracy itself needs to be trust, and as everyone knows, trust is hard to earn, but very easy to lose. And unfortunately, we've all seen the headlines these days. The democratic backsliding is continuing all over the world. There is a loss of faith in institutions. We can even find some politicians that dare to question the integrity of elections, and they create their alternative truths, let's say. And this is happening at all levels. And this is, of course, a tragedy because we believe in Lumi that all democratic elections are equally important and or are worthy of the same level of security as any government national election, and all need to be trusted. So there's a lot in stake, yeah.
And to your point, I think trust is highly correlated to reputational risks. So for any organization that loses trust, it has a real impact on reputational risk. So obviously we live in a digital world, and with that comes a growing landscape of cybersecurity threats. So tell us a little bit, what are some of the most prominent digital threats facing organizations that use online voting platforms?
Yeah, that's a long list, probably. First of all, we need to differentiate between what would be external threats and internal threats. So first of all, when we think about security, we usually think about external threats. So we always have in mind this hacker in their basement or this army of hackers from another country who try to rig the elections in order to boost a particular option. Not only try to rig the elections to change the election results, but even to undermine the trust in the system. If they are able to cast a shadow of doubt on something that is not working well, that is enough usually to make a problem with election. Also, on top of that, even if we usually think about someone trying to rig the election or to change the results, one of the most common attacks or threats would be a denial of service attack. So this means that someone can try to bring the server down so nobody can vote during a period of time. They can try to make it the voting service unavailable, so nobody could be able to exercise their right to vote, and that's also an important thing to take into account. And any stakeholder, in fact, themselves could call the results into question. As we said before, some politicians may claim against the integrity of the election, any external party, media, etc., if you cannot prove that the election was conducted successfully and without any rigging. This would be the external threats, but you also have internal threats. We don't think so much about those, but you can have, for example, internal administrators who have access to the system, that they could be malicious administrators that play man in the middle attack. So they act like this man in the middle that is eavesdropping all the communications. So you need to have a system that is resistant even to internal administrators. You don't need to trust administrators. You need to design a system that is built in order to make sure that you don't need to trust the persons. And also there are, of course, human errors, there are mistakes that happen. So you need to build a safe and sound system that is can stand up to this kind of stuff. And finally, I would say that perhaps there is a third category that we can call, I don't know, future threats or something like that, but they are already here. We can talk, for example, about AI. AI is now the trend that everyone talks about. So I said that with AI, there are lots of new attacks, attempts of phishing. In fact, let me explain that in Lumi recently, we had an attempt of phishing attack with our CEO. So someone used AI to mimic exactly the voice of our CEO and trying for some employees to take that bait and share sensitive information. Fortunately, no one took that bait, but that's something that is quite common. It's happened constantly. And also another future technology that is quite coming, it's quantum computers. Quantum computers, we don't know if it will be 5 years or 30 years, but we will soon have quantum computers, and then everything will change technology-wise. All the cryptography that we are using now in order to secure these systems, all of a sudden will not be as much secure when we have quantum computers to try to break into those algorithms. So you need to take those into account as well. We're already building future-proof, what we call everlasting privacy protocols that are even capable of resisting this kind of attacks. So as I said, it's a long list. Summing up, there's a lot to keep up in terms of threats and attack vectors to organizational elections, and you always need to be always reinventing yourself.
It's really interesting because one of the threats that I think is somewhat insidious is the second one, the internal threats, right? Because cybersecurity threats, it's a well-documented threats, but I'm sure there's many organizations that do not think our own people, not because of bad will, might be interfering with election integrity unknowingly. So, and of course, the future of threat is obviously a pretty important one.
Yes.
So I guess the next question would be, why is transparency then such a crucial or critical defense mechanism when it comes to detecting election tampering? Because I think what you're saying is there's a lot of threats we have to take care of, but how is transparency being the defense mechanism?
It's a defense mechanism because, first of all, what we need to understand is that there is no such a thing as a tamper-proof online voting system. Even if some companies would like to claim it, nobody can ensure you tamper-proof, 100% tamper-proof online voting system. So even if you design voting systems that, of course, are tamper-resistant, which is not the same as tamper-proof, as much as possible, the important thing is that the system is what we call tamper-evident. This means that if someone tries to rig the election, someone tries to tamper with your system, at least you are able to detect that and you are able to take corrective action. I mean, in every democratic election, you would expect, irrespective of how you run it, that you would expect voters, observers, anyone to scrutinize the results, to raise questions, and this is fantastic. We like it. We want people to be involved and to ask questions, but in order to be able to answer those questions, you need to have a system that is auditable, that can stand up to scrutiny, because otherwise, as we said, trust is hard to earn, easy to lose. This is like a snowball that it just takes a single seed of doubt that starts snowballing into a mass of mistrust, and then everything is unfortunately lost. So you need to build tamper-evident systems that allow you to demonstrate and to detect in due time if there are attempts of tampering. And this also makes it more difficult for attackers because you discourage them. If the attackers know that the system may not be tamper-proof, but is tamper-evident, maybe they are discouraged because they know that their attempts won't get them long and get them far.
And it's so interesting because transparency here is highly correlated to trust, right? So I guess we're getting into the next section of our conversation around why trust in election is so important. And as you said, trust is hard to earn and easy to lose, but even an hint of doubt in your election results can spiral into a broader skepticism about the ability of your organization to run proper election. So in your view, Victor, what message does it send when an organization uses election software that isn't fully trustworthy?
Well, if you use this kind of software, these organizations, they basically are taking the risk that their voters, their stakeholders get the impression, maybe the false impression, but they may get the impression that the organization is not taking them and their democratic heritage seriously. Because, you know, trust, the integrity of organization, I'll say this several times, isn't something that is easily earned. And you have this risk of being eroded, degraded just by a single online election. So we have a saying in Lumi that we cannot fail just a single time. We can fail just once, because if you fail once in an election, then you're done. We've been 20 years delivering elections, and that hasn't not happened yet. But if you use what we call a black box system, this can threaten the ability of your organization to survive long into the future, because when trust is eroded, there's no way. In fact, we have a video to explain more clearly what the black box system is when compared to a fully end-to-end verifiable. We can see in this video, this is the ballot box, typical ballot box. with the administrator of the system, the voters, the observers, and ballots themselves. So the voters can cast their ballots, can mark their options in the online voting system, can put the ballots into the ballot box, and they see what's happening all the time. They see that the ballots are there. The observers can also see that the ballots are there. Whereas in a black box system, everything is locked into a box. The administrator has the key. So voters and observers can no longer see what is happening. You don't know what's happening with your ballot. The administrator could theoretically eavesdrop everything. They could modify, they could tamper with the results. Even an external attacker that is in agreement with the administrator or the administrator doesn't know could do this kind of stuff. So this is what we try to avoid, and this is what we're talking about when we talk about black box systems.
So this is really interesting because we talked about the risk, which are numerous, and we talked about the technology that can support that. So let's move to the solution side of things. The best way to defend, as you mentioned, Victor, against threats and mistrust is to proactively build integrity into your voting process. And you talked about end-to-end verifiability earlier. But how can online voting uphold the same democratic principle we expect from government-run election, for example?
Well, the easy answer, of course, we're not going to go into the technical detail today. The easy answer to this question would be that you can convert all the checks, balances that you found in physical polling stations with paper voting. You can convert them and you can bring them into the IT world for online voting. Okay, so just to mention a couple of examples, when you vote, for example, with postal voting, you use a double envelope in order to maintain the voter's privacy when voting remotely. You use a double envelope. The outside envelope has your name on it, and then the poll worker who sees that envelope sees that this is coming from Victor Hidalgo, who is an eligible voter. Then the outer envelope is destroyed, and the inside envelope, which is anonymous, is put into the ballot box. This way you can ensure voter eligibility, but also anonymity. This can be done also in the IT world, doing the cryptographic equivalent. Or another example would be when you go to vote physically on the ballot box, before that ballot box is open and the ballots are counted, poll workers are instructed to shuffle the ballot box before opening it, so nobody can trace back that the last ballot was the one from the person that just left the polling station. So there is also an equivalent in cryptography called mixing process that shuffles the ballots or encrypts them before you open them in order to make sure that they're available. This was the easy answer, I said. The complicated one is that, however, you need to overcome some contradictions when voting online. For example, again, voter eligibility. At the same time, I need to ensure that a voter is eligible to vote. So I need to strongly authenticate that this person is really Victor Hidalgo, is the person he's claiming to be. But at the same time, I cannot trace back, no matter what, not even an internal administrator, that this ballot comes from this valid voter. So you have a seeming contradiction here that you need to solve somehow. This is technically solved nowadays, but it has some work to do. I mean, we've been in the business for 20 years now, designing these cryptographic protocols that allow this.
Really interesting. And I guess now that we're on the stream of a bit of technicality, we've talked about end-to-end verifiability a lot, and it gets used a lot. But can you break it down for our audience? What does that mean, actually?
Sure.
End-to-end verifiability.
Yes, sure. We use it a lot. And well, the main definition would be that an end-to-end verifiable voting system is as we mentioned before, a tamper evidence system, a system that allows you to detect any tampering attempt. However, I'd like to highlight that end-to-end verifiability is not a term that we have come up with. It's not a marketing term. It's a formal definition by the academia. There's a formal definition that says that an online voting system is end-to-end verifiable only if it provides three types of verifiability. And the first one is cast as intended verifiability. And this means that the voter himself or herself can check that the ballot that they are casting really contains their voting options. So if I click on candidate A, when I click on cast, I need a way to make sure that nobody has tampered with that ballot and the ballot that is sent encrypted really contains candidate A within it. The second one is called recorded as cast verifiability. And this means that the voter can check that their ballot really arrived to the ballot box, was successfully stored in the ballot box, and was really included in the final tally. So there are ways also to provide these, like, for example, voting receipts, etc. We're not going into the detail. And the third one is called counted as recorded verifiability. And this means that any auditor, any third party can come in and check, mathematically prove that the results that come out from the system, nobody has just come up with those numbers, but those results really come from the content of the encrypted ballots. So if you have these three categories, the vote is cast as intended, then is recorded as cast, and then has been counted as recorded, then yes, you can say that you have full end-to-end verifiability. And only if you have the three of them, you can stand up to scrutiny, you can demonstrate that nobody has rigged election, nobody has tampered with election. Otherwise, if you are missing one of these three pieces, you wouldn't be sure of the process end-to-end. And this is also usually divided into two groups: individual verifiability, which would be the first two. So the voter can verify themselves also for their peace of mind. This is not a black box system. I don't know what's happening with my vote. And universal verifiability, that means that any auditor can come in and check the results. I always put the same example, that is the candidate who lost the election, for example, who was second in the race, they can bring in their own auditors, and you can give this proof, which are publicly available. This is universal verifiable. And if the auditor of the candidate who lost says, yes, this is correct, nobody has rigged the election, and the candidate accepts the result of the election, then usually everyone else will be happy to accept as well the result.
So this is really interesting because it's this concept of end-to-end verifiability across the entire voting journey and the ability to disclose the details that really bring transparency and trust at the forefront. But the reality is, how does, we talked about some of the risk associated with online voting. How does end-to-end verifiability directly address the threats and concern we've discussed so far beyond the level of transparency?
Yes, here we need to take into account two layers, let's say, the layer of security and the layer of verifiability. So as we said before, we try to design systems that are tamper resistant, and that has to do with security, but also tamper evident, and that has to do with verifiability. The security layer helps you to, let's say, make things more difficult for the attacker. So
Right.
encryption, we use digital signatures, we use this mixing process, we use cryptography, in brief, to make sure that nobody can eavesdrop the contents of your ballot, nobody can modify the ballots, nobody can tamper with them, nobody can do ballot stuffing, etc. But even if someone with a magic quantum computer came and tried to manipulate your election, then you have the verifiability layer, the tamper evident part of the system. In this case, you will be able to detect if something went wrong, if you tried to cast a ballot and it didn't include your voting option because you had some malware on your computer, you would be able to detect and to take corrective actions.
Mm-hmm. So we talked, it's interesting because we talked about the product, the problem we're trying to solve. We talked about the threats that we have to take into account as we deploy a system like that. But are there advantages beyond that? And I think one of those is around accessibility, right? So security and integrity matters, but so does being accessible. So tell me, Victor, accessibility is often viewed as being at odds with security. How can organization ensure both?
Yes, I would say that this is the typical in every IT system, that accessibility and or ease of use and security are in a balance, and if you increase one, it goes against the other. But I would say that online voting is the exception that confirms the rule, because online voting systems were designed precisely to bring accessibility to voters who couldn't vote on their own before. Like, for example, voters with disabilities, because they have some visual disabilities or motor disabilities, they cannot go to the polling place, or voters who live far away from a polling place. For example, in Australia, they allow online voting for those people who live more than 20 kilometers or 15 miles away from a polling place. Of course, overseas citizens, people who live in another country and cannot vote on their own because postal vote gets too long to get, or they don't live near an embassy and they can't go there to place their ballot in a ballot box. So in this case, I think that online voting, as I said, is the exception that confirms the rule, because on top of all the security that of course is of paramount importance, I would say that the motivation that brings online voting in place in the first place is to bring accessibility and to bring universality of the vote to all voters, no matter their disabilities, no matter where they are.
In the process. Well, I think beyond that, I think there are some really positive ripple effect. And so can you speak to some of your clients, Victor, who've seen when organizations make voting more accessible to members or employees, what positive outcome have they received from it?
Yes, well, there are a lot of benefits. The first one, we already talked about accessibility for all eligible voters. So no matter where you are, no matter if you have disabilities, that you can vote on your own in an autonomous manner. And I would say that probably the most important one is a higher turnout, because if you have another voting channel, because when you think about online voting, you don't need to replace completely paper voting with online voting. You could have an additional channel. You can still vote on paper, you can vote online, and you can choose. When you open a new voting channel for people that are traveling or are abroad or whatever, and they can vote on their own and very easily and with your phone or whatever. This usually translates into a higher turnout increase. So, for example, I don't know, in Denmark, for the voting for the collective agreements in companies, since the last decade, the turnout has increased from 30% to 59%, more or less, so almost doubled, almost a 100% increase. Same thing in Switzerland. In Switzerland, they've been using in several cantons online voting since 2004, and they have been seeing this constant increase throughout the years. And of course, there are also other benefits like efficiency. The counting is much quicker and much efficient. You avoid voting mistakes. You have a complex ballot that you don't know how to mark. You could make a mistake, then the ballot is void and wouldn't count. This can't happen with an online voting system because everything is in a controlled interface. But on top of those, let's say, side benefits, I would say that from the democratic perspective that we are talking today, the most important one is that of providing higher accessibility and higher turnout figures.
And that means something beyond that. When you think about your client, Victor, how does increased participation translate into stronger trust and better decision-making outcomes?
Well, because this is a fundamental principle in democracy that the larger the turnout, the bigger the mandate. And of course, if you're running for office, you don't feel the same if you have been elected with just 20% of the people voting compared with 80% of the people voting. This brings trust in the system, trust in the democratic system, that it is working not only in the online voting platform but in the system overall, and of course makes democracy more sustainable in the long run, because then it's the contrary of the snowball that I said before. This is a good snowball, that you have higher turnout, that this brings more trust, and this brings higher turnout again, and then you keep pushing up democracy.
And I would assume there's probably a positive correlation between the level of engagement, the level of trust, and reduction in reputational risk.
Of course, yes.
Overall.
Overall.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true, yes.
So this is that was the last section of our discussion, and I wanted to open it for Q&A. We have a number of people who've asked questions in the chat. So if that's okay, Victor, I'm going to ask you a few questions on behalf of our audience. With the first one being...
My final takeaway, if before we do questions, if someone needs to run because they have a busy schedule, I would say that if you need to just remember one sentence from this webinar, let it be this one, is that secure online voting with the same standards and democratic principles as paper voting for government elections does exist nowadays, and it is made possible with these end-to-end verifiable voting systems.
Oh, and what a great segue into the first question. That is exactly about end-to-end verifiability.
Okay,
So let me
great.
read it. The first question is, why are these insecure black box systems so common if end-to-end verifiability is so crucial for online votes to be secure?
That's a good question. They are common indeed, but this is because, first of all, perhaps we don't think about trust and verifiability as of paramount importance for any election. So somebody may think, okay, but my election is not so important. We think that all elections matter, all elections are equally important. And as we said before, we've been designing voting protocols since 20 years ago. So when we started with this, it was because we wanted to be able to securely vote online. However, since some years ago, you know that in 2020 we had this COVID pandemic. Well, all of a sudden, everyone realized that we were all in a lockdown and we couldn't vote. And then, oh, well, perhaps online voting is a good idea. And then a lot of solutions came out of the blue trying to address these concerns, but not from a let's say, rigorous perspective of this needs to be secure, this needs to be verifiable, but just, okay, I'm home and I need to vote. So that's why I think there has been this widespread of black box systems. It's also a question of education and understanding that after all elections matter and trust is an important thing.
I think that's the difference between that election end-to-end verifiability and the democratic process that's really part of the mission of the organization versus opportunistically trying to meet, the demand in the context of a pandemic. The next question actually is, for those of us whose organization lack experience with online voting, would you have any suggestion about how to introduce online voting as inclusive online voting in as inclusive of a manner as possible? Sorry, that was a mouthful.
Okay. Okay, so
You want me to repeat it?
how
Because
to, no, it's okay. So how to introduce online voting in an inclusive manner?
yeah.
It's a complicated question because it depends on every organization, of course. Depends on their electoral rules, depends on the type of voters, what type of voting they have, and we're happy to have this consulting service for everyone more specific. But as a general rule, general guidelines, first of all, as I said, you don't usually replace your current paper voting system, postal voting, with online voting. Online voting is an additional channel that can be offered on top of what you have already. And it also tries to mimic as much as possible your current electoral process. So the thing is that you want to give your voters the confidence, the trust, the security that this is not a black box, that I don't know what's happening. You want to give them this peace of mind that everything you can check with these individual verifiability features, that your vote has been cast as intended, has been recorded as cast. You offer it as a separate channel that they can, they can play with, they can try. And let me tell you one thing, all of our clients, all of them who have already tried online voting, all of them, they tell us the same thing. Now it would be impossible for me to go back to paper voting. If now I say to my voters, we're going to get rid of online voting, we're going back to paper again, I would be I would be fired immediately. So the way to do it.
And does your answer change if it's an organization? I think the question from the audience here is specifically for an organization that lack experience with online voting. How do you facilitate making the business case for online voting for an organization that might be a little bit reluctant to consider?
Yes, that's why we're here to help. I mean, we don't consider ourselves Illumi like software providers or just a platform provider, but we like to be election partners, okay, election experts, because we can go all the way with our clients to help them introduce this kind of projects. Because as I said, every organization has a different wall, has a different set of rules, has a different mindset for their voters, and they need to understand how this is good for them, how this is convenient for them, and how this builds trust on the entire system. So yes, we're here to help.
So there's a real partnership, right? This is not check the box items. This is a real partnership between you and the client to make sure that we deploy a solution that meets the need of the client.
Exactly.
There is a question here from a member of our audience. Do you still see a need and value in having scrutineers in the bigger institutional events?
Yes, scrutineers is always a good thing to have. I mean, you need scrutineers, but you also need the tools for them to be able to scrutinize the electoral process. So the thing is that there has been a paradigm shift that before with paper voting, everyone could have an observer there and everyone could understand what was happening because I see the ballot is in the ballot box, that is transparent for a reason. Then I see people counting papers, or now with voting tabulators, etc., and everything was easy. Now, when you shift this to the technology layer, everything is in a box, you need IT expertise, etc. In order to be able to scrutinize that, you need tools, and you need mathematic tools that allow you to, for these auditors that now they need a different educational background to be able to do their job. But it's always good to have scrutineers in an election, that's for sure.
Okay. Next question is about, we heard the term sustainability earlier. How might secure online voting play a role in helping organizations navigate the transition to a greener world?
Well, this is an easy one. Green, we like green, we love green. I mean, this is another, when I said there are a lot of benefits of online voting, I didn't mention this one, but of course, in terms of sustainability, imagine there was a study from 2023, I think, that said that moving online to online voting instead of paper meant a 99% drop in carbon emissions due to all the paper ballots that are no longer printed, all the postal envelopes that don't need to be sent, all the logistics from all the trucks moving around, people for polling stations, for ballots, etc. So the amount of savings here, not only savings in money, but savings in carbon emissions and to be greener, it's insane, yes.
It's pretty significant.
Yeah.
So the next question is about, you mentioned that end-to-end verifiability is essential for secure online election. Is this just your opinion, or is it a view shared amongst those working with online voting? I think I know the answer to this. I think you spoke to the influence of academia there, but I would be curious to know what your thinking is on this question.
End-to-end verifiability is not a term that we have come up with in Lumi, but it's a formal definition in academia. And I would say that yes, that the common understanding between academia, online voting providers, clients who issue requests for proposals for public tenders is that end-to-end verifiability is nowadays a must in every online voting system. In fact, you can find papers out there. So, for example, there was a recent paper from the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany that they published in October last year in an event that is called eVote ID. We went there, and they said in that paper, where they analyzed several online voting providers, that end-to-end verifiability is the only way that you are able to make statements regarding whether or not an election has been manipulated or has been rigged. So yes, I think that this is common between everyone in this online voting world, not only academia, but also vendors, organizations, etc.
It's a common standard in that space. That makes sense. Well, we're talking about, I think we're sort of addressing the next question, which is, are there any standards for online voting?
Standards as such, like the ISO of online voting, this doesn't exist yet. There are some de facto standards, like the recommendations from the Council of Europe. I would say this is probably the most used. Also, in every country, for example, in France, they have the recommendations from the CNIL, which is the agency for the data protection, or in Germany, the BSI, etc. But there is not an official standard. Even if we are trying to actively chase the fact that we create an agency to define the standard. So an agency with online voting providers, academia, all the relevant stakeholders in the online voting world to define the standard, because I think that would be a good thing to have in place for everyone to be sure that their elections can stand up to scrutiny, basically.
And then final question, which cryptography protocol do you use in this system?
That's a very good and question that we could spend 1 hour here. So our online voting platform is called Electa in Lumi, and it has its own cryptographic protocol. If we understand the cryptographic protocol as the complete set of rules by which you cast your ballot. And this means the encryption that is used, the digital signature, the mixing, all the end-to-end verifiability features. And the good news is, I don't know if the person who asked this is technical, but that this is published in our webpage. So this is again practices that you need to publish your crypto so it can again be revised. For example, the Cultural Institute of Technology revised our cryptographic protocol and said how good it was. I'm not going to spoil you the the end, but it was very good, and it's public in our webpage.
That is fantastic. It looks like we are at the end of all of our questions, Victor.
Okay.
Any last words before I give you a big thank you for stepping in so quickly and with such short notice on this webinar?
No, it's my pleasure. I'm really like evangelizing, let's say, and trying to make everyone aware of the importance of elections, of trust in democratic elections. I really believe this is now a personal belief that online voting is the future and that we will vote online, everyone. But we need to, this is democracy, we cannot take it for granted. And we need to keep up the good efforts so democracy can hold up and can have this continued trust that is so hard to earn.
Well, this is fantastic. What a way to end. Well, with that, I would like to thank you all, our audience. Thank you, Victor, again for joining us in today's session. Please do not forget, at the end of when we end our webinar, we're going to give you a very short survey to complete. And we have another webinar coming up on election again. So we look forward to seeing you there at the next webinar that is scheduled for the May 28th. With that, I wish everyone a great rest of the day. Again, thank you, Victor, and thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.